It strikes me there must have been an incredibly difficult book to write, because there's obviously a point when it comes to the flood, and you begin a book in about 2003, is that right? I know it. Maybe
yes.
You should tell me. It's actually been about 20 years in your mind. Would that be right when you first heard about Claude Shannon?
It's been just over 20 years since I first heard about Claude Shannon and information theory. It was when I was working on chaos, and some of these chaos scientists were studying a particular dynamical system, which happened to be, this is in the book, the chaos in the flow of a dripping faucet. And they were trying to explain this mathematically in terms of information theory. And that struck me as, wonderful and strange, because what does information as a measurable thing have to do with a dripping faucet? Entropy was involved. I wrote away for Claude Shannon's book, which has never been out of print. They made a book out of these two technical articles that appeared in the Bell System Technical Journal, The Mathematical Theory of Communication. And it's kind of readable, even by a non-mathematician like me. I mean, you have to skip the equations, but you do get the idea. I hope nobody's going to say that about my book, by the way.
But did you find that it's like trying to... I think the feedback will keep my questions very short. It's trying to capture flowing stream in a way, because when you start a book in 2003, at a time when, I think I'm right in saying there may have been no YouTube, Google was still fairly young, Twitter didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist, and all these things which we're so familiar with. Google Books wasn't something you could dip in and out of at any moment, and so many other things. Was it a very difficult book to read in that way, or write in that way?
I either deluded myself or chose to think that I wasn't writing a book about the present day. Most of the work I was doing had to do with the past for a very long time. And I knew that the story was going to continue to the present, and I was aware that, yes, as you say, it was a flowing stream, and that was going to be a problem. But in the end, I decided it wasn't a problem. I don't think it was a problem. I mean, one thing that, I turned the book in, I turned the manuscript in, and immediately started reading things in the paper and making panicked phone calls to my editor, or the other way around. But really, the book is not meant to be about the contemporary internet. There's some stuff about Wikipedia that I think, because I think it actually says something about our collective, I almost said the world brain, our increasingly collective way of sharing knowledge, let's say. But I don't mention Facebook, and I barely mention Twitter, and a year later I think that's okay.
But it's in a way, is there, when you talk about information always being there, and you look at how so many of us now spend our days sharing information with people, passing information around, that we're almost as if we, as a species, become purveyors of information. And you look at something that kind of phrase a selfish gene, but it's almost, is there an argument that the information in some way is using us in a way as much as we're using it?
Well, there is an argument, yeah. I mean, that's the argument that comes, as you know, under the heading of memes. Memes being the invention of Richard Dawkins. You're all familiar. You've all heard the word. The word is itself already a meme. It's a cliche. It's an idea that has staying power and apparently self-replicating abilities. But it goes with a feeling that I take quite literally, I think it's more than a feeling, that information does have a life of its own, that we are not its owners. In a kind of trivial example of a meme is a tune that plays itself in your head over and over again. It's an expression. I can't get that music out of my head, right? Well, what does that mean? How does that happen? Aren't we in charge of our brains and what music we listen to? Apparently not. And there are other things all around us, more than ever because of cyberspace, that are examples of information spreading, it seems, willy-nilly.
But how much do we need of it? I mean, how useful is it? I think Claude Shannon found it. He just effectively saw the information as either having information or no information, and that was that. But what is the meaning ultimately of it? Or is there any meaning to it?
to information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're coming dangerously close to asking what's the purpose of information, and these.
Well,
are,
I saw you answer a question one stage. You asked what that you said yourself. You get when anyone asks what is information, it says it's a question that gives you the willies. So I'm sort of working around that.
All right, but you're raising the crucial issue, and I know you're doing it deliberately. The gap, if there is one, between information and meaning, and it's an issue that I wasn't completely conscious of when I started working on the book, actually. I mean, I'm a believer in the idea that the only way to learn what you're writing about is to actually write it. And here's an example. Well, Claude Shannon's information theory, which I've sort of been touting, operated by divorcing information from any notion of meaning. He was treating information as an abstract thing. I mean, I've been saying, as a scientific quantity, it needs to be mathematicized and measured, but it also needed to be separated from meaning in ways that are sort of obvious when you think about it. A string of 1,000 bits, if you're going to measure it from an electrical engineer's point of view, is 1,000 bits long if it's nonsense, or if it's true, or if it's false. That's not satisfying to us as humans. And at first I thought, okay, that's not a problem. It was sort of amusing to watch the development, as a piece of development of scientific history, to watch meetings between Shannon and other engineers and computer scientists on the one hand, and social scientists, anthropologists, and psychologists on the other hand, to talk about these exciting new ideas. And psychology was being influenced by information theory. And so was anthropology in a way, but they rebelled at the idea that here was a theory of information that didn't care about meaning. And they would say, well, you haven't got a theory of information, you've got a theory of beeps. It's a signal theory. Don't make it sound so grand. I'm giving a long-winded answer to your question, but in a way that I felt that was our problem too, and that this is not just a metaphor, but in a real way, the problem that confronts us as consumers of information. That on the one hand, it's plentiful, it's practically free, we get it instantaneously, we feel that we have global reach, and on the other hand, we often feel, so I'm speaking only for myself, that we aren't necessarily any smarter as a result. We're not better equipped to make decisions. We face, more than ever, the challenge of finding the information that's meaningful.
And is there a sense as well, there's information poverty still exists, and I think we live in a society and a part of the world in which that information is readily available, but clearly there are large parts of the planet where it isn't available. Is information to an extent a luxury of this particular age? Is that one of the reasons why we see it as the information age?
I think it's getting cheaper. It's in some ways a commodity. You're absolutely right. It is not equally distributed. The more we appreciate its value and its necessity, maybe the more we should care about its equitable distribution. I mean, this becomes an issue in so many ways. It becomes an issue for educators about whether you're going to allow or require laptops or portable devices in classrooms, and if you do, are you making sure that every student has access to them? I mean, these are hot issues today for good reason.
And do you think, obviously as the technology changes and the way in which we carry information changes, are we in any more danger of losing that ultimately? That if something cataclysmic was to happen, for instance, what would some far-flung future civilization find as a remnant? As the more that we store things in the cloud, and you talk about the cloud, that are we more in danger of losing it? I know at the same time you've talked a lot about all the other information that has been lost over the years.
Yeah, I have an opinion about this that may sound contrarian, actually. I think it's natural to worry that information in the cloud is ephemeral, and our access to it can be so easily cut off. And what if there's a power cut? And meanwhile, who's in charge of it? I've been reluctant to turn my email over to Google. But I don't agree with the argument that you started to hear, and you still hear it, you started to hear it maybe 10 or 15 years ago commonly, that as we turn to digital devices to store our information, it's becoming easy to lose. I think that the opposite is true. I think that information historically was lost more in the past. I mean, at any time in history, we've continually gotten better and better at retaining it. I mentioned Sophocles' plays vanishing. And conversely, I've already mentioned that our expectation now is that everything is recorded. I mean, here, we're just having a conversation. It's a conversation that is meant to involve the participation of you 100 or 200 people who are here. But not so long ago, that would have been gone. Now I have a sneaking suspicion that it's being preserved. Yeah. Thank you. The engineer just raised his hand. Does it really need to be preserved? I don't feel I've said anything all that great. If it was lost, it would not be a tragedy.
Something to show my mother. So I'm glad it's being recorded.
Something exciting could still happen, and I hope you'll have some exciting questions. But sometimes I play bridge online, I confess. Anyone else? One. Come on, really?
How about poker online?
Okay. It is a fact that there is a permanent record of every card that is played in an online bridge game. They save them, and to varying degrees, you can get access to them, but nobody expected that kind of information to be stored, and now it is being stored. So, yes, if the power is cut off, if we have a nuclear holocaust, that information will vanish, but I would argue that the books would have burned too.
Well, you mentioned questions, so I think it's only fair that we ask. There's a microphone here, actually, down at the bottom, but maybe you can hear anyway. Oh, yeah, of course.
So you're saying rather than the information being at risk, we can store so much that anything really. And do you think the ease of storage of information means that we're missing that editing step, like the big volume of literature, of poetry at the beginning? You got the junk as well, and it's harder to get to the good stuff.
Right. Editing becomes a problem. Curating, if you're a museum. Selection. Maybe this is what you mean by editing. If you're a newspaper, part of your function is not just gathering the information, traditionally. It's selecting which information you think is worth printing and which isn't. And if you are somebody who paid for that newspaper, consciously or unconsciously, part of what you were paying for was that selection. My grandfather read one newspaper every morning on the subway on the way to work and a different newspaper every afternoon, and those were his choices, and they almost defined the political and contemporary events information that he chose to get. And it was very much in the control of a small number of authorities who were the editors. Now, on the one hand, we don't need the editors as much because we've got the whole world tweeting at us. And on the other hand, we need them more than ever because, as you say, the tweeting is not self-edited. That's the dilemma.
I mean, do you find, in terms of the flood, it's quite an optimistic book, I have to say, at a time when a lot of people do feel very threatened by the amount of information and our ability to cope with it. But ultimately, do you feel we are able to cope with it? Because clearly this isn't the end point in terms of that flood of information. That flood is only going to rise over time.
I'm glad you feel it's optimistic. I do feel optimistic in a general way, but I try to have it both ways in the book. I don't mean to dismiss the fears. The fear that information is perishable, the fear that we're in a flood of undifferentiated information and editors and curators are devalued or are a dying species. I mean, these are legitimate things that we need to worry about. As I've said, everything is so much in flux that it's almost hard to defend my optimism, except to say that I see us reacting to these challenges and finding our own solutions. I believe, rightly or wrongly, that professional editors of the kind that right now are still employed by newspapers, curators that are employed by museums, book publishers, that these professionals are going to survive in a new digital economy, because what they do is still going to be valuable. Maybe it's going to be more valuable than ever.
As an editor in the Irish Times.
There you go.
And my mother will be very pleased to hear that as well. Do we have any other questions?
You mentioned the example of a string of nonsense bits and a sentence, and said that they have the same number of bits to an information theorist or a signal theorist, but the sentence really has more information in it, right? Because it has the relational context between the bits in a certain pattern that obeys certain rules.
Well, you're making a very good point, a very good technical point. And actually, by Shannon's definition, the English sentence of the same number of characters has less information than the random sentence. That's because information is surprise. Let's see, how much do I want to devote to this? Let's say you have a string of bits that's zeros and ones in alternation, 100 of them. After you've seen 90 of them, you know exactly what's coming. And the next 10 bits don't really provide any new information. And a way to express that is to say that instead of sending the 100 bits one at a time, you could send a message, alternate zeros and ones, repeat. Rinse and repeat. In a sense, natural language is like the zeros and ones. It has regularities in it, as you're pointing out. Statistically, if you see the letter T, the letter H is more likely to follow it than the letter Z. And using Shannon's math, today's computer engineers, when they compress English text to send it over telephone wires or store them on computers, are making use of these regularities. In a sense, they're using knowledge of the language in order to compress it. Once it's compressed by the most efficient means possible, then the 100 bits are the same, whether they refer to something nonsensical or not. I was using a kind of shorthand there.
Take more questions.
Hi. Given about 100, 200 years ago, an educated man was able to have a good understanding of most issues, of most broad issues. Today, there's no way that even the most educated man or woman on the planet can have a comprehension of anything close to a percentage of the full amount of information that is out there. Do you think in that, and given the flood you speak of, and given so many other dangers like the commercialization of information and the concentration of information in a small number of commercial hands, do you think the science fiction of Isaac Asimov or other such science fiction writers has credence? Do you think we're moving towards some sort of doomsday scenario in that regard? Is humankind doomed?
Well, not all of poor Isaac Asimov is about doomsday. Some of it's actually quite optimistic. I think that you've come up with a very nice way of another way of expressing what the source of anxiety is about the flood of information, and that is no one person can be smart enough to keep up with everything, or even to be a successful polymath. And one of the, you could say sobering or you could say comforting things I discovered in the course of working on the book is what an old type of anxiety that is. As soon as the printing press started flooding Europe with books, there were people who were saying TMI, in effect. For example, Leibniz in Germany talked about the horrid mass of books, and he said this is a kind of hyperbole that seems incomprehensible, but he said it threatens to return us to barbarism. And I think what he meant by that is exactly what you're saying, that suddenly it was not possible for one wise well-educated man such as Leibniz to keep up with everything that was important in developing human knowledge. But that was already around 1700. And he didn't have Twitter. This is exactly how we feel about any subset of the flood of information today. You start buying books and you have too many books and you're always behind in your reading, or you start following bloggers and you realize there are too many of them to keep up with, and then you turn to Twitter.
How do you manage? Because obviously one of the things about this particular book is that it covers such. I mean, the first words when you were talking were, "If I can digress for a moment," and there is an element of that in the book.
Yeah.
Clearly, there are so many digressions, yet everything is held together. How, as a writer, do you approach that a subject so vast?
Well, let me say two things. I mean, I think, but maybe they're the same thing. What I'm trying to say is, we give up the search for perfection. Leibniz was kidding himself, even in 1700 or whatever year it was, if he thought that he could know everything. That was an illusion that was created by a certain type of dearth of information. And so, if we think that our goal is to really, know everything that we need to know, we'll never. So I guess I manage by being an ostrich and burying my head in the sand. But more specifically, in writing the book, the same issue arises. I mean, I start by saying the whole world is about information, and now I'm going to write a book about information, and it deprives me of a neat stopping point. So I gave up on any chance of perfection.
There's a gentleman here who's had his hand up for a while as well.
Hi. Do you think people need to be more careful about giving their personal information to private companies, or is there no cause for concern in your opinion?
I think some people need to be more careful and some people need to be less careful. I don't mean to be glib. That's a very real concern. It's one of the many very real dangers that's popping up on the highway we're traveling. Sometimes we're aware that we're giving companies private information and we're making a conscious trade. People say, you want the free stuff we're providing, you've got to register and provide an email address. I mean, right? The Irish Times requires some personal information about you. And not only that, you're aware, I'm sure are quite aware, and other people maybe are less aware, that they're tracking stuff about you. Maybe the Irish Times is keeping track of which articles you like best. And some of what they're keeping track of may just be aggregate information about all readers in general, but maybe to some extent they're keeping track of what you yourself like to read. Google is doing that. We know it or we don't know it, and we make a conscious deal with Google or an unconscious deal, but the fact is there are trade-offs, and we need to be alert. Like it or not, the Irish Times and Google are both going to give you service that you like better if you let them have this private information about yourself. I believe that as a matter of public policy, governments ought to keep an eye on it, and I also believe that, I guess, as to state this as simply as possible, as a principle of public policy, we ought to have the right to control and know about information that private companies are collecting about us.
It strikes me, though, there's a generation that sees those boundaries very differently. That the Facebook generation, just to be completely glib about it, but who are putting information about themselves out there in such a way that seems, even to those of us who are a little bit older than them, almost alien. I mean, so do you see that? Do you see that there's become a generational gap? That idea of the digital native as such, those who are far more comfortable with it, who can navigate this world easier, who understand its ground rules, or maybe don't understand its ground rules.
I'm always reluctant to make generalizations about people of different ages, because who knows? People of all ages make the same mistakes. But yes. I think we all have to learn certain lessons. I mean, we all have to learn that if we post pictures of ourselves out with friends being drunk on Facebook, it could raise issues at an employment interview in 20 years. And however old we are, we're going to learn that. And
I hope I don't learn it.
well, if any of you recognized yourself in that little anecdote, then it's too late.
Take a question.
I just wanted to say first that you mentioned that you don't think we're in as much danger in terms of data loss now as we used to be. That's scant consolation coming from someone who's just been told it's going to cost him 800 quid to recover the stuff on his hard drive. But the question I have is a more philosophical one. From your reading, you talk about the bit maybe being the natural unit of data. You look at DNA. Well, you look at a bit. As we all know, it's a Boolean system, so binary in nature. It's either a 1 or a 0. DNA, on the other hand, uses a quaternary system where you have 4 different states, whether it's A, C, T, or G. And you could look at fuzzy logic and all sorts of other examples. Is a bit just a nice conceit to represent the notion of a unit of information, or do you think it is the most logical representation of a unit of information?
No, I think the bit is for real. The bit is the irreducible unit, and all of the other systems that you mentioned mathematically can be reduced to binary. Sometimes it's trickier than it looks, and even Shannon. At first blush, you might think that telegraph, Morse code, dots and dashes is binary, but of course it's not binary because it required less obvious signals, which were the pauses between units, the demarcation between units. There were dots and dashes and pauses, it turns out, of 2 different lengths, because telegraph operators very quickly learned to use a short pause for characters and a longer pause to delineate words. Is that right? Yeah. And Shannon actually did the math and worked out how you convert that into binary mathematically. That's true of DNA and to all of the fuzzier seeming versions of information that we deal with.
I know we could take questions all night. Maybe we'll have there's 2 more hands raised anyway. Maybe we'll go with 2 more questions.
Thanks very much. Very interesting lecture. So when I think about information in my life, I think the 2 main issues I have are the day-to-day flood of information, which I'm bombarded with, and how to process and decide what I look at. And secondly, is if I look at all of global information, not information that's immediately attacking me, so to speak, but if I stand up and look at everything and I see, evolutionary biology, complexity theory, cultural anthropology, and I'm seeing all these multiple streams of information arising, and they're all telling me that they're making sense of how the world is, but yet the view that they all have is radically different. And I think then there's this big conflict that we're currently experiencing, is how do we relate with this kind of these different kind of disciplines in some sort of sane manner that integrates or brings it all together into some sort of synthesis. So I'm wondering, does the book address those kind of issues, and have you any thoughts on what the post information age would be like? So it's as if now we've got this huge, massive information readily available, and now we're at this cusp of potentially moving into some sort of post-information age, or age of synthesis, or integral age, where we, like, I don't know if you know any of the meta-theoreticians like Roy Bhaskar or Wilbur, who are trying to look at how you'd integrate all this information into some sort of framework that can account for the differing multitude of perspectives that we're currently seeing. And I'm really interested in what your thoughts are on that.
You just reminded me that I haven't even really answered the question about whether we're about to encounter doomsday. And it's hard for me to imagine a post-information age. What would a post-information age be? Since I've just claimed that all human history is the information age, I also want to claim that it will continue to be that way. I will admit that this claim may be based on my own lack of imagination and short-sightedness, but I can't imagine us ever, as a species, being less interested in gathering information or sharing it or trying to make sense of it. Now, part of your question has to do with the difficulty of making sense in this flood of conflicting frameworks for information. And you put it very nicely, and then you asked me whether that's something I deal with in the book. And all I can say is, yes, I think I try to deal with it, and I certainly do not manage to give any final answers.
Don't ruin the ending now. And maybe a final question here.
Thank you. Is that on? Thank you very much as well. Really fascinating. And following on slightly differently, I'd like to ask, a particular thing about information is something you've touched on right from the beginning, speaking about Mr. Shannon, and that is the accessibility of mathematical information as opposed to sort of linguistic information. Our world seems to be going more and more towards a situation where you can't actually comprehend or participate in discovery unless you're very comfortable with mathematical knowledge. Do you think that this is a problem we face certainly in Ireland? I think this mathematics is not as strong in our schooling as we'd like to think. Do you think there is a divide, a permanent divide between that information, or do you think that there will be ways to bridge it as time goes by?
I'm going to give another answer that will reveal lack of imagination and say that I'm not sure things are any different now than they've ever been. That is, technology develops, and when new technologies arrive, it feels as though you really need some technical expertise to cope with them, certainly more in the computer era than ever. On the other hand, we can all see, at the very same time, a lot of smart people and a lot of money being devoted to catering to those of us who do not want to worry about mathematics when we use our computers. Right? I mean, Steve Jobs just died. He would have been horrified to hear you say that you think more than ever we need to know something about mathematics to participate in this world. Everything that he was about was about solving that problem. On the other hand, I feel, have I said on the other hand about 1,000 times tonight? On the other hand, here at the Science Gallery, I don't want to say that having to know some mathematics is a problem. I want to say that it's good for all of us to be reminded of the importance of mathematics and science, of scientific ideas in not just constructing the world around us, but in helping us construct a sensible view of the world.
Well, in a couple of minutes, I think you're going to stay for a book signing. I have to ask, because you were saying before the lecture that you were talking in Sydney recently about the future of the book. I mean, do you think in 5 or 10 years' time, when you come back here with another book, that you'll still be signing a hard copy, even a hardback? Or will you have a digital signature on a screen or a thumbprint? Or
if I told you, I hope I will. I personally still like the physical books, but I have started reading ebooks, and I have nothing against that. And some people have come up with ways of signing ebooks. Maybe there are people here who. Oh well, that's not exactly it. Somebody recently brought me an iPad and asked me to, and had an electronic copy of my book and asked me to do something with my finger. And I realized that I was going to need to practice a new kind of penmanship.
Well,
that's true.
Well, look, thank you very much. I think everybody found that fascinating and continued. We really look forward to the next book, which I don't know if you can tell us anything about what you're working on now.
I can't, and thank you, Shane, and thank you all. And I feel as though I gave partial answers to a lot of questions, and I'm sorry about that, but thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. James Gleick.